The ground doesn't warn you. It erupts. Stone shatters like glass. Fire spits from the earth. And in a blink, someone is gone, swallowed whole. One breath separates the living from the buried. Thrill from terror. This isn't a legend or a nightmare. It happened. And it's only one of the stories we're about to uncover. When laughter turned into screams. When caves became coffins. And when survival hung by a thread thinner than breath. Tonight, we go down with them. The night was December 21st, 1997. A chill cut through Arizona's desert air, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones even when the ground looks dry and barren. Brandon Silverhorn and four of his friends, Christopher Reed, Gus Hansen, John Salazar, and Jeremy Platt, were young, restless, and itching for something reckless to break the monotony of winter. They drove out to the Safford Shafts, a desolate stretch of land locals also called the Red Knolls. To most, it was nothing more than a wasteland scattered with deep pits carved into the hardened bed of an ancient lake. To them, it was the perfect playground. The Red Knolls had always carried an eerie reputation. 40 to 60-foot vertical pits dotted the ground like open wounds. Some were filled with silt, others capped by thick slabs of rock that looked as if they were holding back something best left undisturbed. But when you are young, warnings sound like dares, and danger feels like proof of courage. The group arrived around 9 p.m., headlights cutting across the rugged earth, their laughter mingling with the hum of the engine. They had brought gasoline, not for a vehicle, but for a spectacle. The plan was simple in their minds. Pour fuel into a narrow fissure in the rock, light it, and watch fire erupt from the earth like a volcano. It was an idea born not of reason, but of recklessness. They stood near the fissure, a crack barely a foot wide that cut into the rock like a scar. One by one, they poured gallon after gallon of gasoline into the darkness. 4 gallons in total, enough to ignite not just a flame, but a disaster. The air smelled sharp, chemical, and heavy, clinging to their clothes, burning their throats. With the crack filled, Jeremy soaked a rag in gasoline, lit it, and tossed it into the abyss. For a second, there was nothing. Silence. The kind that tricks you into thinking maybe nothing will happen. Then the world exploded. The ground shuddered violently as the gasoline ignited, sending a blast of fire, dirt, and rock skyward. It wasn't just a flame. It was a geyser of chaos, a roar from beneath the earth as though the ancient lake had been waiting centuries to spit out its fury. The fissure widened instantly into a gaping hole, jagged edges glowing with the heat of the blast. The force hurt feet, slid down into the pit, pinning him where he lay. It pressed against his abdomen and kidneys, forcing his head sideways into the rock wall. His leg bent at a grotesque angle. Dust choked the air, filling his lungs with grit. Each shallow breath was a battle, every inhale clawing at the edges of survival. It was as if the earth itself had decided to bury him alive. Above, his friends scrambled to the edge of the pit, coughing through the haze, their eyes burning from smoke and gasoline fumes. They called his name, but the only response was silence. The pit was an open grave, and Brandon had vanished into it. Fear turned their adrenaline into panic. They weren't cavers, they weren't rescuers. They were 5 young men who had just watched one of their own disappear into the ground. Their shouts echoed into the void, unanswered. The reality was unbearable. They couldn't save him. Not on their own. The only choice left was to run. They bolted back to their car, tires skidding across the dirt as they tore toward town. Minutes turned into nearly an hour before trained rescuers arrived, headlights flooding the Red Knolls, ropes and gear clattering as they rushed to the pit. When the professionals peered into the crevice, they understood immediately that the night would not end quickly. Brandon wasn't simply trapped. He was sealed. The slab of rock on top of him wasn't just heavy. It was fused into the tilted crevice like part of the earth itself. Every move they made to shift it risked sending more debris tumbling onto him. Meanwhile, below the surface, Brandon drifted in and out of consciousness. The cold gnawed at him. His leg pulsed with agony, every nerve screaming. The pressure on his abdomen and kidneys sent waves of pain through his body, pain that blurred into nausea and darkness. Dust coated his throat, making even a whisper impossible. He tried to shift, but the weight crushed him down. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, each one another battle to stay alive. Above, rescuers rigged a tripod over the chasm, ropes dangling into the abyss. They began chiseling away at the slab, every strike a careful gamble. The sound of steel on stone rang through the night, each echo followed by a tense pause as dust trickled downward. Inch by inch, they carved out space, just enough to fit a pulley system. Hooks were driven into bedrock, ropes tightened, and his leg was broken, his kidneys failing under the weight of the slab, his body shaking violently from hypothermia. And yet, against every odd, he clung to life. Carefully, they maneuvered a harness around him, immobilizing his broken leg. Inch by inch, they pulled him upward, their hands guiding the ropes, their eyes fixed on his limp body. It took nearly 12 hours from the moment of the blast until Brandon was lifted out of the earth. When his body finally surfaced into the cold desert air, the sight silenced everyone. His leg was grotesquely swollen and twisted. His lips were blue, his skin ice cold. He looked more ghost than man, but he was alive. At the hospital, doctors confirmed the toll of his ordeal: a shattered leg, severe hypothermia, and kidney failure. His survival was nothing short of miraculous. Yet as remarkable as his endurance was, the story remained a brutal lesson. Pouring gasoline into a fissure, lighting it, and treating the earth like a toy. This was not adventure. This was recklessness flirting with death. Brandon had lived, but only barely. The others had escaped with bruises and burns. All of them carried scars, some visible, some buried deeper. The Red Knolls did not forgive. It had nearly swallowed a young man whole, leaving behind a story that felt less like a night of adventure and more like a warning, written in fire, stone, and blood. It was February 1994, and the Caribbean was all sunlight and ease. White sand stretched endlessly into turquoise water. The air was sweet with salt and hibiscus, and the days moved lazily, as though nothing in the world could ever go wrong. For David Parks and his friend Jerry, vacation was more than beaches and rum drinks. They wanted a story, something unforgettable, something daring. That desire, as it so often does, pulled them toward danger dressed up as adventure. Local whispers told of a cave hidden inland, a vertical shaft that opened into a chamber with a dark pool at its heart. Some spoke of its beauty, others of its risk. But to two young men filled with confidence and curiosity, it sounded like a prize waiting to be claimed. They weren't trained cavers, they weren't divers, they had no maps, no guides, just snorkeling gear, a pair of dive lights, and the belief that the world would make room for their recklessness. The entrance was a 70-foot drop straight down, a narrow throat of stone, slick with dampness. Climbing it was slow, their hands scraping against the wet rock, their breath quickening not just from the effort, but from the thrill of going deeper than they had ever dared. When their feet finally found the chamber floor, the air grew cooler, stiller, a silence settling that was heavy enough to feel. Before them lay the pool, motionless, black, a mirror that refused to reflect. They didn't hesitate. Clothes left in a pile, masks fitted tight, lights flicked on. They slipped into the water. The chill shocked them, prickling their skin, but beneath the surface, their lights cut through the dark like blades. It was mesmerizing, the way the beams danced on stone, the way their bubbles trailed upward like silver threads. What they did not know, what they could not know, was that this pool was not contained. It led into veins of stone, narrow underwater tunnels threaded through the cave like traps set by the earth itself. They swam forward, lungs tight, surfacing now and again in air pockets, tiny domes of breath clinging to the ceiling. At first, it felt like discovery, each pocket a secret, each passage a challenge. But as they pressed deeper, the walls drew closer, pressing in, scraping shoulders and fins. The weight of the earth above them was palpable. Every inch forward bloomed. The silt rose. At first just a cloud, then a storm, thick and choking, swirling around them until their lights could do nothing but illuminate a white void. The clear water became milk, visibility reduced to nothing. Their arms stretched forward into a blindness so complete it was like swimming in night. Panic surged. David turned, searching for Jerry, but the water was impenetrable. In seconds, he was alone. His chest tightened, lungs screaming as he kicked in what he thought was the right direction. But caves are merciless with mistakes. He was going deeper. Every stroke carried him away from the exit. The silence underwater pressed against him, broken only by the thunder of his own heartbeat in his ears. His body begged for air. At the last moment, his hand broke into emptiness. He surged upward, his head slamming against stone. A stalactite tore into his scalp, blood mixing with water, but he didn't care. His mouth burst into the thin safety of an air pocket. He clung to the rock, gasping like a drowning man, his breaths ragged and shallow. But relief faded quickly. The pocket was small, the air stale, the ceiling pressing down like a lid. He was suspended in darkness, trapped between the crushing silence of the cave and the knowledge that the only way out was back into the suffocating water. Meanwhile, Jerry had somehow found his way to the entrance chamber. He surfaced, waiting, expecting David's light to follow. Minutes passed. His voice echoed as he shouted into the water, his beam slicing into the tunnel. Nothing. The realization set in like a stone in his stomach. His friend was lost in the maze behind him. In the pocket, David knew he had no choice. The air was fouled, unbreathable. His head throbbed, his chest burned, his body trembled on the edge of surrender. He pulled his mask back down, turned off his light. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could see Jerry's glow in the distance. And there, faint and ghostly through the murk, he did. A shimmer of hope. He pushed off the rock, lungs screaming as he swam toward the dim light. Every stroke was agony, his body threatening to give in. The glow grew brighter, and then suddenly his head broke the surface again. He was met with the searing, "All rights." Neither man should have walked away from that cave. But they did, and the lesson was written in every scar of memory. The earth does not bend for your plans. If you step into its depths unprepared, it will take you, and it will not apologize. It was Memorial Day weekend, 1980. In Kings Canyon National Park, the sky was the kind of blue that seemed untouchable. The air filled with the resin scent of pines and the crisp chill of mountain elevation. For a team of 5 cavers from the Motherlode Grotto, Dave Cowan, Paul Graves, Jack Asina, Bob Pine, and Eric Popoff, it was the perfect day for exploration. These weren't reckless teenagers chasing a thrill. They were seasoned, practiced, men who knew their knots and their ropes, who had trained their bodies to fit into stone where most people wouldn't dare to breathe. And yet, no amount of experience could prepare them for what waited inside Church Cave. The approach was long and punishing. They hiked steep switchbacks, boots grinding against loose rock, their bodies sweating despite the cool mountain air. Laughter carried between them, the kind that comes when confidence overshadows caution. Their packs were heavy with gear, helmets, carbide lamps, ropes, anchors, but their pace was eager. By 9:30 a.m., they stood at the yawning mouth of Church Cave, excitement running like electricity through the group. Entering a cave is like stepping into another world. Sound shifts, the air dampens, and light fades into memory. The deeper they went, the smaller the world became, until it was reduced to nothing but the glow of headlamps and the scrape of boots against stone. Inside, the atmosphere was alive in its silence. Water dripped from unseen places, echoing like heartbeats. Their lamps cast shadows that bent across walls like moving figures. The deeper they descended, the more the cave seemed to breathe around them, the weight of thousands of years of stone pressing down invisibly. Then, the world changed in an instant. A low rumble at first, almost like a growl from the belly of the earth. Then it grew. The ground shook violently beneath their feet, walls groaning, the ceiling cracking with sharp reports as if something immense was tearing free. Dust rained down, choking the air, and the cave roared like a living beast. A 6.0 earthquake had struck. Imagine the terror of standing deep underground as the planet itself shifts violently, every vibration amplified, every stone around you suddenly uncertain. They clung to the walls, hearts hammering, certain each second would be their last. When the shaking feels multiplied, like the world is not just shaking, but trying to devour you whole. The men pressed forward, reaching a section with a name that seemed written as foreshadowing: the torture chamber. It was a narrow chute, steep and slick, one they had descended earlier with caution, but now had to climb under duress. Jack Acina took the lead, pulling himself upward hand over hand. And then the second massive quake hit, a second 6.0. The cave roared to life again, more violent than before. Jack lost his grip, his body slamming against stone as he tumbled back down. He came to a brutal stop, wedged between two boulders, his screams ricocheting off the chamber walls. The others clung desperately to the chute, fighting to hold their positions as rocks and dirt cascaded down around them. When the shaking finally eased, the chamber was filled with dust and the sound of Jack's cries. He was stuck, trapped tightly, his body bruised and his panic spiraling. The others worked with furious urgency, anchoring ropes, coordinating every pull and shove until, with bruised hands and raw strength, they freed him from the stone's grip. There was no time to dwell on pain or fear. The cave was still alive, still shifting, and still ready to crush them. They pressed forward again, each movement a gamble. Aftershocks rippled through the earth, forcing them to freeze mid-step, pressing themselves against the cold walls, praying the stone wouldn't collapse on top of them. Dust stung their eyes, coated their throats, and made every breath taste of burial. Time stretched painfully thin, each minute lasting an eternity, every sound magnified into dread. And then, at last, they saw it. Light. Faint, precious daylight filtering through the entrance. They staggered toward it, battered, dirt-caked, bloodied, but alive. As they emerged into the open, the earth gave one final shudder, a 5.7 aftershock that sent rocks crashing down behind them, sealing the memory of what could have been their tomb. Church Cave did not collapse that day, but it threatened to. And for those 5 men, survival was not triumph, it was a reminder. Underground, all skill and training can feel meaningless when nature decides to move. The cave had spared them, but it left its mark, transformed the ground into a weapon. Brandon Silverhorn lay broken and buried, surviving only through endurance that bordered on the miraculous, and the back-breaking determination of rescuers who refused to give up. That night was a lesson in how swiftly thrill-seeking can shift into tragedy. In the Caribbean, David and Jerry entered a cave with no training, trusting their lungs and luck. They found themselves in tunnels where one cloud of silt erased all sense of direction, where stale air pockets felt like coffins, and where the difference between life and death came down to the faintest glimmer of light. They surfaced alive, but not because they were clever. They survived because fortune decided, just this once, to spare them. And in California, the Motherlode Grotto cavers discovered that even decades of experience cannot outwit the planet. A quake tore through Church Cave, turning the ground into a living enemy. Dust, darkness, collapsing stone. Every skill they had was reduced to one primal instinct: survive. They emerged battered, their confidence tempered into respect, carrying scars not just on their skin but deep in memory. Together, these stories paint a truth that is easy to forget. Caves are not playgrounds, they are reminders. They remind us that beneath our feet lies a world carved by forces we cannot control, one that can shift, collapse, or suffocate without warning. They remind us that arrogance, whether it's gasoline and fire, blind exploration, or even seasoned overconfidence, has no place underground. And they remind us that survival, when it comes, is not a guarantee, it is a gift. For every Brandon who breathes against the weight of stone, for every David who claws his way toward a faint beam of light, for every team that crawls into daylight just as the ground collapses behind them, there are countless others who do not return. Their names are etched only in silence, in the dust and the dark. So the next time someone asks, what would happen if you were trapped underground when fire, water, or earthquake strikes? The answer is not heroic. It is not cinematic. It is cold, simple, and absolute. Nature will remind you that your life hangs by the thinnest thread, and if you're lucky enough to crawl out, you will never forget that truth again.